So the new owners of SAA say they are eager to get the airline back into the skies. The Takatso Consortium is taking a 51% in the airline. Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan made the announcement earlier today. Joining me now is the former CEO of SAA, Vuyani, Jarana. Mr. Jarana, thank you so much for making time on the lead this afternoon. You were the CEO of SAA for less than 2 years, but you understood the ins and outs of the airline. What do you think the involvement of the private equity partners means for the future of this airline?
I think it's a welcome development from my side. I think it should set SAA into an improbable path to success. What the airline needs, like any other business, it needs capital, that is access to capital, pools and pools of capital. If you look at the airline, given its capital intensity, it needs a capable team that can execute on the plan. And I think if we listen to what has been announced today, there are technocrats in the aviation industry, and I assume that they will bring more experienced executives to come on the airline, which means a capable team that's commercially savvy, that can execute on the plan, which is a requirement number 2 for success. The third element is a speed of execution, enabling the airline or like any other business to respond promptly to the stimulus in the market and be able to take decisions quicker. And I think when you look at the 51% shareholding, what it does then, it takes SAA outside the PFMA and therefore begins to fashion SAA to operate like its competitors, whether it's Emirates and others. So 3 major issues that I've read out of the press conference. All those key 3 indicators should set SAA into a path to success. Of course, the 4th element is good governance. We'll see when they start operating. But the most critical things, access to capital, capable team to execute that's knowledgeable, and the speed of execution. So constraints around PFMA, taking time to make decisions. As long as that business competitors are much more agile than you are, the single biggest dimension of strategy is timing. The what and the how can be copied, can be understood by everyone else. But what's key is the timing of execution. And I think when I read what came out of the press statement today, actually it's likely to set SAA for success.
You've mentioned the issue of government giving up its majority stake. They only own 49% now. Do you imagine it's a good or a bad thing in the context of how limited the influence of government may be in dictating the running of the airline?
So I actually think that for me, the state ownership, whether you are state-owned or privately held, that's not the issue. What matters most is setting the company to actually move with speed and compete effectively. When then you have the 51% ownership, if it's with government, that it then arrests the airline into the good and the bad intentions and the consequences of PFMA that stifles ability to run fast as a private business. So you probably will see a much more bigger upside with government having 49% and because obviously it will run profitable. So the biggest burden of having to provide capital to SAA will go away. But most importantly, they are likely to get a return on the dividend flow down the line with 49%. And obviously, if I read the document, it says there's 33% decision rights with government on critical national issues, which means government is beginning to say there are certain things which would like to wield more influence. So to be honest with you, if I look at it, it's the best deal from an architecture of the deal itself that you could get. Partners looks like they have good access to equity to funds, which is capital pools. You look at the team, the aviation experts there, and I'm sure they will understand that putting in commercial people who are strong in the airline is what will make sure that they will get returns on investment, but also wrestling SA out of the shackles of PFMA puts it in the same path with its competitors. And if you do those 3 things, then there's no one who should complain. It's up to the team to execute. But also, when you bring in private equity, that is private investors, you really have people who have got the real skin in the game. They understand the implications of the decision they make. So it's not kind of proxy shareholding structure. It's really people who said, it's my money, I have to make sure that I make the right decision. Then that management team will probably get the best decision from the board and the shareholder.
Yeah, and I mean, the finance minister has always said we need to start running these SOEs like private companies. When you resigned as CEO in 2019, you raised concerns over the lack of support to implement the company's turnaround strategy. You've included these three things that you've mentioned. The capital that is important, they've put in 300 billion rand. You said you need a capable team. It looks like there's a team in there that has experience in the aviation industry. You're saying this takes them out of the shackles of the PFMA, this 51% private ownership. What advice do you have for the new owners, for the new management at SAA?
I actually think that the structure of the deal solves the biggest impediments, because in my view, the SAA didn't have market issues. But I think the constraints were more internal. I've always been consistent with this. So if you look at the capital side, where you start to really put equity in the business. You don't raise guarantees and let the business go and raise debt. There's a certain level of debt that a company can carry. SAA was overburdened with debt. So when you've got players like this who provide real cash into the system, then you're setting SAA in a path to succeed. But also, if you're able to enable to be agile with less constraints around rules, the people who make decisions are the people in the business. Of course, the board and the shareholder included to that on that team. So they've solved the bigger part of the puzzle. I think the key thing is to really bring in people who understand the industry, who are commercially sound. It looks like in the profile of the shareholding structure, they understand how these things work. So I do think that they've set themselves up for success. The rest is execution, honestly. It's detail, and it's purely commercial execution and addressing customer needs.
Yeah, and of course, that capital is 3 billion rand, not 300 billion rand. They probably would have bought ownership in many SOEs with that amount of money. This move comes at the time, Mr. Jarana, it's quite a tricky time for the aviation industry. Most airlines are barely surviving the impact of COVID-19. So they're going to need some fresh ideas in order for the airline to thrive in this tough environment.
It's to be honest with you, the best time to set up an airline, it's now, because everyone is fragile. Have the ability to catch up with the people who are already operating. I think the opportunity they have, given that it's kind of starting from scratch, they have the ability now to adopt much more agile cloud-based IT systems. And they can actually disentangle themselves from the legacy billing systems, customer acquisition systems that the airline industry has stopped. So it's very difficult to transform a legacy IT system, which SAA had for 15, 20 years. But if you start from scratch, you go for cloud-based system, and you change the rules of engagement. You de-link the rules of customer acquisition or ticket acquisition versus ticket redemption. When you start to think that way, you can actually begin to make the airline industry operate like a pure retail kind of organization or retail industry. Because if you look at it historically, the airline industry, when you acquire the ticket, there's a lot of rules. It must be linked to will fly historically. But we are starting to see the thinking to de-link the two. You buy a ticket like a simple voucher, but when you redeem it, you actually start to deal with the protocols of identity for security. So they have a chance to really trust themselves into a different construct of operating with no legacy, so to speak. So not much advice, but I think even though there are difficulties in terms of the COVID and the number of people flying, but also they have a chance to start from scratch, and they could actually set up good agile IT systems with good analytics behind it, and they will succeed.